Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce our distinguished guest, the renowned poet and novelist Sylvia Plath, as part of our program, A Fireside Chat with Sylvia Plath.
Thank you for welcoming me into your homes through this medium, which feels in its own way like speaking into the abyss, where voices float between the living and the dead, caught in the static of existence. It's a peculiar thing, isn't it? To be here in a space where words are all we have, stripped of the comforting layers of the page, where they must dance or drown on the air alone. I often think of poetry as an attempt to name the unnameable, to reach into the dark corners of the self where the ordinary and extraordinary coexist, tangled in the mundane and the miraculous. In the rhythm of everyday life, the quiet violence of the mind can be deafening. My writing is often born from that tension, from the tightrope walk between despair and ecstasy, where one is never sure if the next step will lead to salvation or the abyss. Perhaps that's why I'm here with you tonight, to share in that common humanity, to let the flames of our shared experience crackle and spark as we attempt to make sense of the world, or at the very least, find some beauty in the attempt.
Thank you for being with us today. It's a true pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss your work and explore your thoughts on some contemporary issues that resonate with your personal experiences. I'd like to begin with your acclaimed novel, The Bell Jar, which I recently revisited with great appreciation. Beyond the semi-autobiographical elements of the story, one is instantly captivated by your distinctive creative style, your ability to draw unexpected connections, and the way you vividly express emotions and inner experiences, leaving a profound impact on readers. Writing was something you deeply loved, wasn't it?
Thank you for your kind words about the bell jar. Yes, writing has always been both a solace and a torment for me, a way to wrestle with the chaos inside and shape it into something that can be understood, if only for a moment. I suppose you could say I loved writing, though perhaps it's more accurate to say that I needed it. It's like breathing or dreaming, something that feels as though it comes from somewhere deep within, not entirely under my control, yet essential to my existence. The act of writing, for me, has always been an intense, almost visceral experience. When I'm writing, I feel as though I'm peeling away the layers of my own skin, exposing the raw nerve underneath, the part of myself that is most vulnerable, most alive. It's both exhilarating and terrifying, this process of turning the internal into the external, of translating thoughts and emotions into words on a page. And yet, despite the pain and the struggle, there's something deeply satisfying about it. Something that keeps pulling me back, again and again, to the blank page, to the pen, to the need to create.
I understand that you began writing at a very young age, with your work being published in literary magazines even as a child. You possessed a remarkable drive to excel. Could you share more about the spirit and motivation that fueled you during your early years?
Yes, I began writing when I was very young, almost as soon as I could form sentences. There was always this intense need in me to create, to capture the world around me in words, and perhaps to prove something, to myself, to others. I was driven by a fierce ambition, a desire to excel and to be recognized. Even as a child, I felt this almost desperate need to achieve, to be perfect in everything I did, whether it was school, writing, or any other pursuit. During my early youth, I was a whirlwind of energy and determination. I remember feeling as though I was constantly racing against time, always pushing myself to accomplish more, to be better, to stand out. But beneath that drive, there was also a deep vulnerability, a fear that I might not be good enough, that I might fail. It was as if I was trying to outrun some shadow, some darkness that was always just a step behind me. Writing was my way of keeping that shadow at bay, of proving to myself that I had worth, that I could make something meaningful out of the chaos inside me. It was exhilarating and exhausting, a relentless pursuit of an ideal that always seemed just out of reach.
In The Bell Jar, there appears to be a profound sense of disappointment with life, a disillusionment that isn't alleviated by literary success, extraordinary intelligence, or sharp wit. Do you think you might have been too harsh in your judgment of the world around you and of the people in it, starting, for instance, with Buddy, Esther's fiancé in the novel?
It's true that the bell jar captures a profound sense of disappointment and disillusionment with life, particularly with the expectations and limitations placed on women during that time. For Esther, much like for myself, the world often felt stifling and constraining, as if it were pressing her into a mold that she didn't fit. There was a deep frustration in realizing that success, intelligence, and even creative achievements didn't necessarily lead to fulfillment or happiness. In fact, they sometimes only magnified the sense of alienation and isolation. As for Buddy, he represents a kind of conventionality that Esther finds deeply troubling. It's not so much that I or Esther were overly severe in judging him, but rather that Buddy embodies the societal norms and expectations that felt so suffocating. He is, in many ways, a decent and well-meaning person, but he also represents the compromises and the mediocrity that Esther fears. Her rejection of him is less about him as an individual and more about what he symbolizes, the life that she feels she's supposed to want but can't bring herself to accept. So while the judgment may seem harsh, it's rooted in a desperate desire for authenticity and freedom, which at times can make one feel as though they're trapped in a bell jar, unable to breathe or escape.
How would you describe the role of clinical depression in Esther's life, as well as in your own? Do you see it as an incidental illness that worsens an already unsatisfactory view of life, or as a natural consequence of the darker reflections you've shared? Although, in your own experience, you tragically didn't find a way to escape it, do you believe, looking back, that there might have been a path to overcoming it?
Depression, for both Esther and myself, is a pervasive force that shapes and distorts our perception of the world. It's not simply an incidental illness that happens to exacerbate an already bleak outlook on life. Rather, it is deeply entwined with that outlook, feeding off of the disillusionment and sense of entrapment. In The Bell Jar, Esther's depression is portrayed as both a response to the overwhelming pressures and expectations placed upon her and as an independent force that colors everything in shades of gray, making it difficult to see any possibility of light or escape. For me, depression felt like a relentless presence, something that clung to me and seeped into every aspect of my life. It amplified the doubts, the fears, and the disappointments, turning them into something almost insurmountable. It wasn't just a reaction to external circumstances, but also a reflection of an internal struggle, a battle between the desire for control, perfection, and meaning, and the overwhelming feeling of inadequacy and hopelessness. Looking back, I wish I could say that there was a clear path to overcoming it, but depression is a complex and deeply personal experience. I do believe, however, that there is hope in connection, in finding ways to express and share the darkness rather than letting it fester in isolation. For Esther, the moments of clarity and relief come when she begins to open up, to seek help, and to allow herself to be vulnerable. While I didn't find a way to fully escape it in my own life, I think it's crucial to recognize that depression distorts reality and that there is a possibility for healing through connection, compassion, and self-acceptance. It's not an easy journey, and it's one that requires immense strength, but it's one that others have walked and come through with a renewed sense of purpose and hope.
In your novel, you describe in somewhat ambivalent way the experience of ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy. The therapy is today considered effective in the treatment of severe cases of depression, although the public perception is generally negative. What is your ultimate judgment for this controversial therapy?
In The Bell Jar, the depiction of electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, reflects the ambivalence and fear that many people, including myself, have felt toward it. Esther's initial experience with ECT is traumatic, largely due to the cold and impersonal manner in which it is administered. It feels like a violation, an assault on her already fragile sense of self. This portrayal captures the terror and helplessness that can accompany such treatments, particularly when they are not explained or conducted with care and empathy. However, there is a shift later in the novel when Esther undergoes ECT again, this time under the supervision of a more compassionate doctor. This experience is depicted as more positive, even beneficial. It suggests that, when done properly, ECT can indeed have a therapeutic effect. This duality in the novel reflects my own conflicted feelings about the treatment. On one hand, ECT can seem brutal and dehumanizing, especially when misunderstood or misapplied. On the other hand, it has the potential to bring relief to those suffering from severe depression when other treatments have failed. Ultimately, I believe that ECT, like any medical intervention, should be approached with caution and care. It is a powerful tool that can offer hope and healing, but it must be administered with the utmost respect for the patient's dignity and humanity. The negative public perception of ECT is understandable given its history and the fear it invokes, but it is also important to recognize its potential benefits when used appropriately. In the right context, with informed consent and proper support, ECT can be a life-saving treatment for those in the depths of depression.
As you describe in your novel and in poems like Lady Lazarus, you tried to kill yourself multiple times. You ultimately succeeded. Does it disturb you the idea to be recalled to life in this simulated interview, violating your ultimate extreme decision, even if only symbolically?
The notion of being recalled to life, even symbolically, in this simulated interview is indeed a complex and troubling one. Suicide, as depicted in The Bell Jar and in my poems like Lady Lazarus, was an expression of an overwhelming desire to escape the unbearable weight of existence, a way to exert control over a life that felt insurmountably bleak. To succeed in that final act was, in my mind at the time, a definitive and irreversible choice, an attempt to end the pain and silence the inner turmoil. However, the idea of being recalled to life in this context, while unsettling, also speaks to the enduring nature of art and the human need to make sense of pain, even after death. My works, in their raw exploration of despair and resilience, continue to resonate with readers and provoke thought, much as they did in my lifetime. In a way, this conversation symbolizes the ongoing dialogue between the living and the dead, between the artist and those who seek to understand and find meaning in their work. So, while it does stir something within me, a reminder of the finality I sought, it also reflects the enduring power of words and the fact that in some form I am still here, still speaking, still part of a conversation that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Perhaps that, too, is a kind of resurrection, one that I didn't foresee, but which continues to unfold through the engagement of others with my work.
Let's shift to another topic. Some of your poetry has been associated with the feminist movement and the push for a more emancipated role for women in society. Over the past 60 years, women have made significant strides, gaining new opportunities and advancing their status in the world. What are your thoughts on this progress? Do you feel it aligns with the direction you originally envisioned?
The progress women have made over the past 60 years is both remarkable and heartening. When I was writing, the societal expectations for women were often stifling, relegating us to roles that felt narrow and predetermined. The struggle for autonomy, for the right to define one's own identity and destiny, was a central theme in my work, and it's deeply gratifying to see that many of the barriers that once confined women have been challenged and, in many cases, dismantled. The advances in women's rights, from greater representation in the workplace and politics to the increased focus on reproductive rights and the fight against gender-based violence, reflect a growing recognition of women's autonomy and agency. These are developments that align with the desires I had for a world where women could live fully and freely, without being constrained by the narrow definitions of femininity that prevailed in my time. However, while the progress is significant, there is still work to be done. The pressures and expectations on women have evolved, but they haven't entirely disappeared. There are new challenges, including the balancing act of career and family, the ongoing fight for equal pay, and the pervasive influence of societal norms that continue to dictate what women should be. I had hoped for a world where women could define themselves on their own terms, free from the judgment and constraints imposed by others. In many ways, we are moving in that direction, but the journey is ongoing, and each generation must continue to push the boundaries to ensure that the freedoms we've gained are protected and expanded. In sum, the progress is encouraging, and it aligns with the ideals of freedom and self-determination that I valued deeply. Yet, It's a reminder that the fight for equality and true emancipation is never entirely over. It requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront new challenges as they arise.
In Lady Lazarus, you expressed some strong feelings against men who are only responsible of taking you back to life after your attempted suicide. Please could you explain the last verse, "And I eat men like air"? Again, do you still feel so severe against men in today's society?
Lady Lazarus is a poem that delves deep into themes of power, resurrection, and resistance. The line, "And I eat men like air," is a potent expression of reclaiming power and agency in the face of repeated attempts to control, oppress, or exploit. In the poem, the speaker, who can be seen as a version of myself, has been subjected to of cycles and rebirth, not of her own choosing, but imposed upon her by external forces, often represented by men. These forces try to strip her of autonomy to resurrect her for their purposes, much like a circus act. The final verse, "And I eat men like air," is a declaration of defiance. It's a way of saying that the speaker, having been through so much, has now become so powerful, so untouchable, that the men who once controlled her are now insignificant, as insubstantial as air. The phrase captures a fierce and almost mythical assertion of strength, a transformation of the victim into someone who cannot be dominated, who absorbs and nullifies those who once sought to control her. The phrase, "like air," in the line is a striking and multifaceted metaphor. It conveys a sense of ease and inevitability, suggesting that consuming these men, representative of oppressive forces, is as effortless as breathing. Air is something omnipresent and essential, yet it's also intangible, something you move through without resistance. By comparing the act of eating men to air, the speaker implies that these men, and by extension the power they hold, are no longer formidable or substantial. They are insubstantial, easily overcome, and essentially insignificant in the face of the speaker's newfound power. As for my feelings about men today, I must clarify that the intensity in Lady Lazarus is directed less at men as individuals and more at the patriarchal structures that have historically sought to confine and define women. The poem is an outpouring of anger and resistance against these forces, and in that context, men become symbols of that power dynamic. In today's society, while there are still power imbalances and systemic issues that need to be addressed, it's important to recognize that the struggle is not against men as a gender, but against any system or structure that seeks to oppress or limit the freedom and potential of individuals, whether they be women, men, or anyone else. I believe in the possibility of a world where gender is not a determining factor in one's power or worth, and where mutual respect and equality guide our interactions. The anger in Lady Lazarus was a necessary force to confront and challenge the oppressive forces of its time, but it also serves as a reminder of the importance of striving for a more just and equitable society for all.
One final question for our listeners. With the recent advancements in AI and the remarkable capabilities of large language models like ChatGPT, are you concerned that future generations of students might lose interest in learning the art of writing and in expressing themselves in innovative and imaginative ways?
The rise of AI and tools like ChatGPT is indeed a fascinating development, and it naturally raises questions about the future of creativity and self-expression. On one hand, I can understand the concern that students might rely too heavily on these technologies, potentially losing interest in cultivating their own voices and honing their unique skills as writers. Writing is not just about producing words, it's about the process of discovery, of wrestling with thoughts and emotions, and of finding ways to articulate the inexpressible. There's a deep satisfaction in crafting something that is wholly your own, something that carries the weight of your personal experience and imagination. However, I also see potential in these tools as a means to inspire and enhance creativity rather than replace it. AI can be a catalyst for ideas, a way to explore new perspectives, and even a partner in the creative process. But it's important that students, and all of us really, use these tools consciously and critically. The art of writing, of expressing oneself in innovative and imaginative ways, is something deeply human, and that cannot be fully replicated by any machine.